Chapter 9. Emotional Mathematics. Hence this tremendous struggle to singularize ourselves, to survive in some way in the memory of others and of prosperity. It is this struggle, 1,000 times more terrible than the struggle for life, that gives its tone, colour, and character to our society. Anonymous. Men have tried to impose any number of ethical systems on our competitive struggle to win personal immortality. All of them have been designed to prevent us from destroying one another in the fight. We are asked to do unto others as we would have them do unto us, act as if our maxim, thought, deed were to become universal. Be honest, pay up on time, refrain from assaulting the weak, and so on. These are good ideas, and now and then they help restrain the more barbarous individuals among us. Responding even a little bit, the stupid and brutish have kept in line far longer than the race had any reason to expect. But the old precepts have shown a tendency to buckle. After all, why love my neighbour when he pushes ahead of me? Why render full value if I could gain more by cheating? Why respect the rights of the next man if he stands in my way? How can honesty be the best policy when I could look around and see exploiters prospering everywhere? Only two must never cheat, my surgeon and my airline pilot. For the rest, when it comes to laying down the law, who says so? Unfortunately, no ethical system amounts to anything unless it can promise some kind of immortality as a reward for good conduct. If both the hustler and the virtuous man end up in the same dark alley, what can my teacher say to me? Yet, despite the collapse of orthodox assurances, we are not completely lawless. Though we endure our neighbours, we also help one another. Considering the meaningless fix mankind finds itself in, we treat each other surprisingly well. True, among civilized people of the West, there have been signs of a vast nervous breakdown gathering momentum. Looking back over its shoulder, pursued by the fear of death, paranoia runs ahead of the culture, racing in circles. Look around for trust and love, and sometimes they appear to be in hiding. Even so, the world garrison fights on. A structure of order and discipline remains. Order and discipline remains. Large numbers have deserted to drugs and madness. Behind our lines, all sorts of violence, as well as casual insults to human dignity, have become commonplace. But they are not yet the rule. The main body of amazing resilience, human decency, has not broken ranks. We hang on, with each survivor clinging to the possibility that he, and perhaps even you, will somehow be rescued. What can the mortal force be? The one still holding the community together in the face of nothingness. One strength seems to come from a natural ethic built into the struggle to live forever. This ethic develops from a sort of emotional mathematics, or a mathematics of being. Being translates here as immortality potential. The impression made on the gods, one score registered on the imaginary calculator of excellence. The more definitely you exist now, the greater the chances of qualifying for the hereafter. Turning this around, the meaner and more ordinary your life, the closer to death, and the more aesthetically appropriate that you should dwindle into nothingness. Life's key struggle, then, becomes the enhancement versus the reduction of being, with enhancement adding luster to your immortality claim, and reduction lowering you toward the pit of non-existence. All other conflicts arrange themselves around this one, which is to say that all human interplay arises from our attempts to force eternity, to gain the illusion of some sort of everlasting life. Everyone carries around with him an existential credit balance. This is his net worth as a person and candidate for divinity. The supply of funded being, the reserve of dignity, he can bring to bear in pushing his claim to immortality. The value of your net worth and mine continually fluctuates. We must at all times seek to maintain and strengthen our being, keep our self-esteem and the respect of others. Brotherhood is experienced as an equation of worthiness. We have to qualify for it, remembering that the state of grace must also be a state of attractiveness, and that all emotional relationships are governed not only by moral mathematics based on respect, but to a large degree by aesthetic considerations, whether the individual acquits himself pleasingly before the gods and men. Hence, the foremost imperative of the Immortalist ethic, the one really lived by all tribe members, beyond creed and culture, is to remain strong and stay attractive. This means at the same time protecting and pleasing oneself and impressing others. When this is done, you will be in a state of grace because the imaginary gods love you. The first imperative, to protect and please yourself, remains more important. The second, gaining the favorable opinion of others, witness to your excellence, helps reinforce your claim, but the strong-minded do not absolutely need the testimony of their fellow men. For example, a filthy ragged monk may seem unattractive to you and me, but to himself, and therefore to the gods, he is delightful. Similarly, we may consider a hunger strike not much more than a starving fool, but to himself he shines with probity. More people lack the fortitude to try for eternal life completely on their own. They need recognition, friendliness, and good opinion. The ethic they commonly live by rests on a balance of respect between oneself and others. The practical ideal is to build up our own bargaining power and within reason allow other men to do the same. In the language of earlier times, the racist commandment might be, "Thou shalt not wantonly reduce another's self-respect and humiliate him in the eyes of the gods." Though competitors, we are brothers and sisters too, fighting the universal death sentence in need of witnesses, and longing now and then to huddle together. We hope to make a better score than the next man. Sometimes, filled with vicious death thoughts, we may try to bait and humiliate him. There are destructive ones among us too, individuals whom common decency is meaningless. Yet most of the species knows how to be gentle. Beyond any natural forbearance, we still fear in our bones the ancient law of Talion, imagining that forces of symmetrical retribution actually exist and wield power over events. We look for both human and cosmic retaliation. If I reduce my neighbour and wantonly defile his good name, he will, in accordance with the emotional mathematics involved, have to get back at me. And if he can't, fate will arrange for me to make a suitable payment. The symmetry of existence will take care of this. The act of breaking another person's form must be counted a deadly sin, second only to that of permitting our own form to be broken. Loss or failure by itself will not destroy identity, but humiliation does. Everybody recognizes a humiliated man, but what exactly is so shameful about this condition? Why should humiliation be such a disaster? The disgraced man suffers a catastrophic loss of immortality potential. He turns out not to be the person he implied he was. At the wrong time, courage fled. He trembled and backed down. Unless he can somehow redress the balance of dignity, he no longer exists except as an impostor, or perhaps tolerated as an apology in the shape of a man. The machine in the sky can be imagined ejecting his identity card and shredding it. The mathematics of immortality counts cruelty and cowardice as the extreme transgressions against the being. Yet cruelty, through tending toward God imitation, may also be employed defensively to shore up self-esteem. In particular, it strikes back against the outlandish and alien. Cruelty can arise from the aesthetic outrage we sometimes feel in the presence of strange individuals who seem to be making out all right, and who give the impression, even while minding their own business, of understanding something about life that we don't. Have they found some secret passage to eternal life? It can't be. If those weird individuals with beards and funny hats are acceptable, then what about my claim to superiority? Can someone like that be my equal in God's eyes? Does he, that one, dare hope to live forever too, and perhaps crowd me out? I don't like it. Although all I know is, if he's right and I'm wrong, so different and funny looking, I think he's trying to fool the gods with his sly ways. Let's show him up. He's not very strong. For a start, see what he'll do when I poke him. From this beginning, it seems easy to move into the monstrousness. The tendency is to despise the victim all the more angrily as his suffering increases, since amateur sadists consider helplessness a perversion and fair game. The most horrible acts may follow. Weakness offends the persecutor in a strangely mortal way. He may be a temporary sadist, made unexpectedly cruel by the other's humiliation. An aesthetic of cruelty possesses the tormentor, convincing him that graceless forms are fit only to be broken. In these circumstances, he is driven, if only symbolically, to kill in order to become divine. Cowardice turns into a little death, a crumbling of form. The coward abandons his will, style, and dignity, rushing too soon into the lifeboat ahead of the women and children and blots his family shield forever, having sold out for transient salvation. The poor man inspires no sympathy, only contempt. The surrender of self under pressure is supremely unaesthetic. Of course, nearly everyone has been a coward at one time or another, and we have been through the loss of grace and temporary abandonment of the people we thought we were. Here a great deal depends upon the way we have come on. For instance, James Joyce in Paris was not a coward when, threatened by a fist, he hid behind the big writer, saying, "Deal with him, Mr. Hemingway," since Joyce had never defined his manhood in terms of fist-fighting, but in accordance with the mathematics of behavior. We all understood that Hemingway declined to stand up. He would have received a craven rating in his own conscience and the minds of witnesses. Courage holds being together and makes you feel immortal. The experience of having been brave rewards us with a marvelous serenity. While it lasts, we enjoy an Olympian feeling of elevation and walk around free of time and fear. The Christian ideal of turning the other cheek has never really caught on and survives only by being ignored. Christianity, a beautiful religion, but also the one most useful to hypocrites, tries for the impossible, pretending not to recognize the healing power of retaliation. In cold fact, as everyone must know, the power to retaliation is indispensable to emotional health. Forgiving the offender will never be good enough, since reduced people lack the power to forgive. Only when the disgraced or insulted man has won back his self-respect can therefore there be talk of reconciliation. An insult offers a sudden and intolerable threat to my net worth. The next man seeks to force-feed a little death into me and knock down my credit rating. Seizing hold of my dignity, he anticipates brandishing it to heaven like a scalp. By insulting me and getting away with it, he boosts his standing on the immortality chart while I sink correspondingly. Perhaps more than anyone, sophisticated hoodlums know how to crush the decent citizen's self-respect. First, do it before his dear ones, while, say, they are out for a family stroll. Surround and terrify them. Force the honest burgher to beg for his life, and lick the gang boots. This amounts to stealing what he thought was his immortal soul. Then they vanish, leaving the victim tormented forever by the agonizing memory. The mathematics of self-respect will leave him no escape. The need for an insulted man to square accounts the language of dignity is oddly financial. seems to be universally recognized. He will never be able to get out of the box of humiliation until he hits back in some way or does something heroic. Acts of contrition will not expiate the sin of accepting an insult. Only retaliation can. A family entertainer once insisted that a bass player in his supporting orchestra sing for the radio listeners. The man had not sung in years and answered emotionally that he did not want to. But the boss wouldn't leave it alone. The man would have to sing. And the confrontation grew tense. The band leader interceded. They would arrange a song for tomorrow's program. The man would be forced to perform, even though listeners along the network had heard him say that he could not. And this is the way a collision was avoided. The music started up. The musician came in with a series of rhythmic howls. Everybody was laughing. He had performed, but not exactly sung, and his boss let it go. In a test of pride, both sides perfectly understood the credit balance. The bass player saved his dignity, the big shot his authority, and they both emerged from the confrontation with their net worth intact. Lately, our show business culture has developed an antidote to humiliation: adroitly managed publicity. An imprint of any kind, favourable or not, stamps our imperishable being on the nature of things. I don't care what they say about me, so long as they mention my name. In the fevered, often upside-down world of stage and cafe, even a collapse of dignity can be made to pay off. Imagine that you are a popular singer and an actor publicly makes off with your wife, ordering you to leave the premises, and you have conducted yourself in a generally pusillanimous fashion, yet the affair can be so managed that your cowardice appears glamorous. Even with horns on, you are declared bigger than ever. The gods take new notice of you. Audience responding publicly agree, and your price and rating go up. Ethical imperatives growing out of the drive to live forever dictate our most commonplace rules of behavior. For instance, they produce the mathematical values of gratitude and modesty. The sin of ingratitude would seem to be relatively trivial, but in our time it has become serious. By thanking you, I place your goodness on the record. I testify to your generosity, sacrifice, nobility, and excellence. Failure to thank someone often upsets him terribly. This anxiety arises from the suspicion gone into earlier, that members of the Celestial Review Board who will judge our credentials for immortality are not always attentive. They may forget to monitor the machine. The lazy, attendant god may refuse to note down our claims unless, by thanking, it has been registered on our behalf by someone else. Also, in the absence of orthodoxy, credit stealing is on the increase. Our competitors find no trouble in actually coming to believe that credit stolen from us belongs to them. The jury of gods may be omniscient, but we also darkly fear their susceptibility to being swayed, charmed, and deceived. Again, the only answer is to pile up on the right kind of evidence in our imaginary dossier. Of all testimony, thanking is the best. Beyond this, gratitude connects two individuals in at least a fleeting amount of brotherhood. The virtue of modesty came into being as a tactical measure. We hoped that it would help integrate us with the gods. Through a mildly self-depreciating demeanor, we avoid symmetrical retribution for hubris. Remaining modest also helps us along with competition. Those who boast and preen before the gods are resented because they tend to distract attention from us. A braggart almost surely will be disliked. He makes other people nervous, and the long wait for his downfall. When he finds himself in trouble someday, witnesses will not step forward. In contrast, the modest man not only devises magic against the gods' annoyance, but sees to it that emotional retribution from his neighbours will be far less likely. Martin Buber said that the lie is the specific evil which man has introduced into nature. Why evil necessarily? Lying helps us to deal with the unsatisfactory reality. Its purpose is to improve somebody's chances of surviving. There are falsehoods of love. To save others from suffering, conceal the hiding place of a comrade, or, as when we pretend not to know where the Christmas presents are, to give greater pleasure an hour from now. Every surprise party is based on a lie. The astounded guest of honor becomes an instant god. But Buber refers to a more sinister twisting of the truth, the kind employed, say, to get ahead by destroying the colleague who suspects nothing, or mean lies, trying to shift responsibility, bearing false witness, falsely taking credit. The ungodly, according to the Old Testament, are not so. This is precisely what the lie fears, that unless he changes reality, he will be nothing. Reflecting on it, the lie is an amazing device. To think that members of our race should actually go to so much trouble as to invent what does not exist. Consider the provocation, the enormous anxiety weighing on our species for thousands of years that could produce such an extraordinarily breakthrough as the decision to reject one reality and substitute another. Of course, it is the same dimly realized obsession that created our myths and poetry. There can be no reason for lying except to escape death, and if there were no death, people would not bother to lie. The liar misshapes reality in order to make himself less vulnerable and more godlike, grand, vicious, or trivial. The lie is meant to increase his being, if need be, at the expense of others. He may be dangerous or pathetic, arrogant or frightened. Whatever his game, he is willing to take a chance on deceiving the gods. The would-be enchanter declares in effect, if the truth prevails, I'll die. We deeply resent liars because they introduce a wild variable into the conventional mathematics of immortality. The rogue soul upsets us by toying with the truth, yet no one shows more resentment and outrage than men caught lying. How to explain their furious cries of innocence? You see this act over and over again, and a murderer who must know that what he has done carries on with outbursts of indignation, like the victim of a conspiracy. If somehow acquitted, he weeps not only for joy, but as though he really were guiltless. Malefactors, trapped absolutely and beyond doubt, swear that they are being smeared and picked on. The official who took a bribe and has money in a Swiss bank account sobs at the injustices of the indictment against him. All such frauds are playing to the gallery and the archives. A man may not mind admitting confidentially that he has always been a cynical opportunist, but he cannot stand having it on the record that he is a fraud, and particularly objects to witnesses saying so. "You're a liar" has always been a fighting insult, whereas, say, "that's not true" is far less serious. In fact, the dialogue usually builds like this: "That's not true. Are you calling me a liar?" One contradicts a dubious statement, whatever it was, but the second calls to account the whole person. To have told a lie is one thing. To be judged as a liar is to have your existence contradicted, which means that your immortality card will no longer be valid. When my credibility is gone, I am gone. The gods in the sky calculator will no longer tally the evidence of my net worth, because my very existence is, a lie. Such a disastrous loss of identity must be intolerable. That is why guilty men weep, shout, and proclaim their innocence in court and before television cameras, again, to fool the gods in their own heads and deceive the big machine. Even a successful fraud comes across as strangely pitiful. Every professional hates phonies. They glitter up the way to achievement, pretending to talent. They try to attach themselves to their betters. Nothing comes easier than to despise them. Yet, for all their meanness of spirit, They belong to a sad order of being. The poor cousins, liar and phony, decide at some point that to qualify for life beyond the grave, they must cheat, that otherwise their bids would not be good enough. Distrusting themselves, they employ gilly on others. But like Peter Shieldmile, the liar and phony have no shadow. This means nowhere. They exist outside of the equation of brotherhood. The relief of loving comes hard for them, and the curse of triviality follows them everywhere. Chapter 10. Love and Evil. Love consists in a constant state beaming forth of a favourable atmosphere. The love of a man for a woman is like an attempt at transmigration, and at going beyond ourselves. It inspires migratory tendencies in us. Olgeta E. Gasset. The problem of evil is the problem of liberty. The dwelling place of freedom is the abyss of darkness and nothingness, and yet, from freedom everything is without meaning. It is the source of evil as well as good. Thus, the fact of evil does not imply that all is meaningless. On the contrary, it actually establishes the existence of meaning. Freedom is prior to the world and has its origin in the primal void. God is all-powerful in relation to being, but not in relation to nothingness and to freedom, and that is why evil exists. Berdyaev. These are the species' two extreme reactions to mortality. Both love and evil seek eternal life, one reaching out with the idea of sharing the prize, the other grasping for it. Falling in love, we share consciousness with someone in an eternity which unfortunately fades away. But during this period, we discover how we would feel if we were gods beyond time. Most people will agree there can be no more blissful sensation, accepting perhaps that of glory. The same thing but felt and shared en masse, with oneself standing in briefly for God, or with our legion suddenly becoming heavenly. Love for a friend has nothing to do with this, or familial devotion, or even the joy experienced on first seeing our newborn infant. Small deposit on immortality, but uncollectible only for the race's benefit. The love projected here involves mingling with another person outside of time. This enhancement of being, as Ortega calls it, the beaming forth of a favourable atmosphere, in which we feel haloed and far more human, has been captured by Tolstoy in Anna Karenina. All that night and morning Levin lived perfectly unconsciously, and felt lifted out of the condition of material life. He had eaten nothing for a whole day. He had not slept for 2 nights. He had spent several hours undressed in the frozen air, and felt not simply fresher and stronger than ever, but felt utterly independent of his body. He moved without muscular effort. He felt as if he could not do anything. He was convinced he could fly upwards, or lift the corner of his house, if need be. He spent the remainder of time in the street, incessantly looking at his watch and gazing about him, and what he saw that then he never saw again after. The children especially going to school, the bluish droves flying from the roofs to the pavement, and the little loaves covered with flour thrust out by an unseen hand touched him. Those loaves, those doves, and those 2 boys were not earthly creatures. It all happened at the same time. A boy ran towards a dove and glanced smiling at Levin. The dove, with a whir of her wings, darted away, flashing in the sun amid the grains of snow that quivered in the air, while from some little window there came a smell of fresh-baked bread, and the loaves were put out. All of a sudden, all of this together was so extraordinarily nice that Levin laughed and cried with delight. Alan Watts says that love is grounded in freedom from self and time. As Ortega has pointed out, we wish immortality for the loved one. We want to share divinity with the other. According to Watts, the general idea of tantric Maitona, as of its Taoist counterpoint, is that sexual love may be transformed into a type of worship in which partners are for each other incarnations of the divine. Jung reflects that complete sexual harmony is extolled as great happiness, one heart and one soul, and with reason, because the return to the original condition of unconscious unity is like a return to childhood. Even more, it is like a return to the mother's womb, into the teeming depths of a still unconscious fertility. It is indeed a true and undeniable experience of divinity, the power of which blots out and consumes everything individual. This last ecstasy appears to be moving towards death. It seems that whenever we write about love, death inevitably comes in through the back door. Why must the two be so frequently considered together? In Love in the Western World, Dennis D. Rougmont painstakingly develops the thesis that romantic love seeks its own non-fulfillment, that it carries forward our secret longing for death, has nothing to do with marriage, and in fact remains at all times in active opposition to it. But de Rougemont's analysis of the Tristan and Isolde legend, which he believes to be the source of Western romantic love, is flawed by his assumption that union in eternity must be identical with their death wish. He correctly reminds us that a myth arises whenever it becomes dangerous or impossible to speak plainly about certain social or religious matters. Then he makes the leap. Myth is needed to express the dark and unmentionable fact that passion is linked with death, and involves the destruction of anyone yielding himself up to it with all his strength. But why should a desire for death be so dark and fearful a crime? My death offends no one in authority. If I want to pay my dues in this way, who cares? And what can there be to fear? How can I be punished for my death drive? By being killed? The passionate transports of Western love certainly conceal a forbidden desire, but de Rougemont has uncovered the wrong secret. What we want is to be transported, to cross over from the human condition into a divine state. We may aspire to lose consciousness now, but only so that we will awake on the other side. The real nature of our longing is brought out by D.H. Lawrence in Women and Love, in this exchange between Birkin and Ursula. Death is all right, nothing better. Yet you do not want to die, she challenged him. He was silent for a time. Then he said, in a voice that was frightening to her in its change, I should like to be through with it. I should like to be through with the death process. And aren't you? Asked Ursula nervously. He said slowly, as if afraid, there is life which belongs to death, and there is life which isn't death. One is tired of the life that belongs to death, our kinds of life, but whether it is finished, God knows. I want love that is like sleep, like being born again, vulnerable as a baby that just comes into the world. Once more, we have testimony that what de Rougemont terms the active passion for darkness does not intend to rest in the dark, but to break through the darkness into a realm of eternal light. That we don't want to die, but desperately, more than anything else, to live, to be reassembled on the other side of time. De Rougemont finds that rapture is now no more than a sensation and leads nowhere. He considers this sort of thing being in love with love, ultimately to embrace death. But somehow being in love, at least during the hours of delight, does not feel that way. The ecstasy of Levin, stopping time and observing the doves flashing in the sun, the grains of snow, and the smell of fresh bread can hardly be dismissed as a mere cover-up for a death wish. The forbidden passion stirring love's delirium is not for death but for eternal life. Passion takes us out of time. In its thrall, we have the illusion of becoming more alive by means of induced suffering, since its referent is immortal now. is a mortal being, this kind of suffering is filled with sensations of uneasy pleasure. Pain in love keeps us young, and keeps the affair young, since pain holds back the passage of time. Difficulties, misunderstandings, and forced separations postpone the threatened deadliness inherited in familiarity. Completion brings the lovers down to earth, and is therefore to be feared. The moment complacency sets in, housekeeping emotions will soon take over. This seems a dismissal on core to ecstasy, and the lovers can't bear the thought of it. Here pain comes to the rescue. Passion keeps the simulation of eternity alive by artificially prolonging the period of caring, with quarrels of reconciliations or intrusions of a hostile family, providing timely injections of useful suffering. During times of social upheaval, in wars and revolutions, when the stability of love is threatened at every moment, uncertainty, which suspends time, thrusts in on the lovers from outside. The resulting tension is sweet. The feeling of immortality comes over us during the London Blitz, the New York City blackout, and the Black Revolution. We seldom quarrel, but take love when we can. The police may break in, the ship will sail, and the furlough soon expire. Darling, it's late, the curtain descends, everything ends too soon. Thus, we have a paradox. The imminence of death projects us into simulated eternity, but the fear of aging and death is no longer with us. Emergencies free us from real time. The hands of the clock move faster, yet is suspended, because only a bomb, not the clock, can make us die. We will go, if we go, all at once. The inevitability no longer haunts us. Under the gun we are gods, the marvelous lovers. In summary, Tristan's deliberate placing of obstructions in the path of love should be understood not as subconscious effort to fail or die, but rather as an attempt to hold back time, string out the divine experience, and preserve it from housekeeping love, and that must soon follow if things go well. Romantic love does its best to put our coming back from eternity into real time. The rule of love seems to be that first we are divine together, but then, with familiarity, we must be human together. This emotional love, that the sensation of divinity must fade away, is accepted by mature people. The immature will not reconcile themselves to giving up the divine experience. They persist in trying to bring it back. Therefore, it is commonly observed that immature natures, especially lovers, make fools of themselves over and over again. Since maturity involves the acceptance of death, they refuse to grow up. This refusal invites not only suffering, but possible disaster in many forms: failure, sexual misery, neurotic ill health, a terrible feeling of apartness, of being no one, nothing and nowhere in the general scheme of things, being unable to finish anything, and finding oneself generally incompatible with life as it is. But if these self-imposed retributions can be risked and conquered, or at least lived with, the uncompromising child voyager remains open to visions that do not come to his mature neighbours, with their wise, nodding resignation to nothingness. What the immature retain is an insistence on their right to immortality, and a child's eye view of what might be. This gives them the strength to love again, try again, and dare foolish new things. They can say proudly, "When I became a man, I held on to childish things." Death will eventually be overcome by the foolishness persistence of such losers. The immature never stop trying to escape time. This makes them difficult lovers, since they find it hard to bear love's aging and coming back down to day-by-day familiarity, job, kitchen, children, bills. To bring back the feeling of immortality, they artificially create pain and mystery. This is done to screw up tensions, which will then be happily resolved in bursts of forgiveness, a form of simulated rebirth. The need to feel love again, in a divine way, like gods, it accounts for the dramatic content of the bourgeois infidelity. Apart from its immediate seductive pleasures, the most commonplace affair, such as that of a businessman with his secretary, recaptures feelings of glory. To the rest of the world, such a liaison may appear tawdry or ridiculous, but to the lovers, the promise of fresh revelations have been restored. If only for a little while, life seems to begin again. The dear or dreary, familiar round is bypassed. The lovers step off the moving sidewalk and carries everyone else towards death. Among the envious, lovers are laughed at, but the laughter is uneasy, because they know something. Holding eternity in an hour, they escape for a while, beyond time and death. That is why the envious throw old shoes at them and fasten tin cans to the honeymoon car, and whooping and hollering, chivalry the enchanted couple if their hideout can be found. Evil is nothing but the destructive things people do because they are going to die. In the struggle to impress the gods and the astral machine, it uses more force than necessary to put down the competition, breaking others' form rather than simply trying to outdo the next person. Evil sets out to deceive, manipulate, but above all, to break down our neighbour and reinforce our claim to immortality at his expense. Mortalists generally presume that cruelty belongs to evil. If so, we have another paradox, that sometimes love and evil combine in cruel games in order to keep their feeling alive. To this end, love and evil meet in pain, but such manoeuvring always turns out to be an ineffective, not to say agonizing means of going after eternal life, one which does not truly resist death, but in a sick and unconvinced way plays with it. The sources of what we call evil are paranoia, god imitation, boredom, and rage at nothingness. Another source might be the Enkman-like inertia of neglecting to feel. The greatness of these is paranoia. As everyone knows, this exasperated form of suspicion senses a conspiracy lurking everywhere to reduce the individual and, in his own mind, as well as in the eyes of others, make him fit for death. Yet, have we not every reason to imagine that there could be such a plot? After all, nature itself has been organized to do away with us. Given the imaginary gods and the competition to survive on Judgment Day, nearly everyone becomes a rival for a place in eternity, and may indeed be plotting, even if unconsciously, to reduce our score in heaven in comparison with his own. The god imitator, we know, resists death by commanding his environment and reducing other people so that they will bow down to him. Boredom is the languid perception of death and meaninglessness. The only reason for cynicism and for deriding others' commitments and small pleasures is the presence of death. Boredom licenses horror, if possible in an intriguing form, in order to relieve endurable monotony. The fourth kind of evil is a cold rage at being surrounded by death, with no god to save or even condemn the victim. Feeling this, Kaluga seeks by monstrous acts to summon up meaning and to make the Almighty reveal himself in the form of retribution. Evil is not Dracula prowling through the opera house searching for his next victim. Dracula, though, is precisely undead, seeking lifeblood in order to live on. Rather, it should be understood as merely one more attempt to get around death. But it goes too far. The evil impulse shows itself as willing to destroy surrounding life in its avidity for survival. On an everyday level, it does its best to knock down others' confidence and effectiveness, reduce their ability to feel their own being, and project it exuberantly, and works diligently to prevent you from loving or trusting yourself. Defining this supposedly mysterious force has been an obsession, endlessly fascinating to philosophers. Buber calls evil the grasping, seizing, devouring, compelling, and seducing, exploiting, humiliating, torturing, and destroying of what offers itself. Evil, says Brodiev, is non-being, has its roots in non-existence. Also, evil passions of whatever kind destroys themselves in the end and involve death both for men and for the world. Unamuno sees the origin of evil as the inertia of matter, sloth. He adds that sloth is the mother of all vices, not forgetting that the supreme sloth is that of not longing madly for immortality. Jung, too, finds idleness to be the curse of mankind. Schelling marks evil as a return to pure power. The same position has been taken by Lord Acton in his axiom that power tends to corrupt, with absolute power corrupts absolutely. This, we have seen, must be the absolutely necessary result of successful God imitation. The illusion of divinity tips over into psychosis when it continues without hindrance over too long a period, because the God on earth knows that in spite of all homage, death waits for him. Berdyaev and Buber agree that the seductive power of evil lies in deception, secret plans to reduce another's being. Buber distinguishes between sinners and the wicked. The first are fallible, but human. Defining the second, he quotes the psalmist, "The wicked are far from thee," and adds, "The wicked have in the end a direct experience of their own non-being." This seems probably not true, in that psychopaths, our term for the wicked, may be separated from others and from love, and even so may plunge into life and experience being more profoundly than a meek, inhibited clerk who never did anybody any harm. It would be foolishly complacent to suppose that evildoers have a smaller sense of being than good people, for evil lives, and often fully. Philosophers generally describe evil as a separating force, and it would be consoling to believe this. But how then can we account for the lusty and vicious brotherhoods of evil, such as stormtroopers and Hell's Angels, who joyously share the pleasures of stomping and degrading inoffensive people, and join in beer-swilling celebrations of the fear they inspire? Here we have the loneliness of paranoia healed by group cruelty, and the gang members hug and kiss each other. Evil, according to Webster's collegiate dictionary, has the effect of producing or threatening sorrow, but so sometimes does love. Perhaps the polar confrontation of being does not pit love against evil, but trust against paranoia. We may recognize paranoia as the opposite of love, since in the end, it mortally fears sharing. Paranoia can never end well. The inability to trust, being reflexively afraid that, given a chance, others will bring you closer to death, amounts to the same thing as fear of love, unwillingness to open up and share consciousness with another, leaving oneself vulnerable to a death thrust. Can love conquer paranoia? That is, can it overcome the suspicion, grounded in childhood, of others as potential death bringers? Never completely. Once implanted, the habit of suspicion never dies, but it can be controlled and temporarily dispelled, perhaps teased so that now and then the damaged self will open up a little and let love in. A certain amount of paranoia must come naturally to intelligent men, because there is death. Small systems of suspicion may be observed at work in almost everyone. Not to be paranoid in the presence of a cosmic plan to kill every last one of us would be extremely difficult. To help alleviate this illness of civilization, we must first of all love little children and hold them tenderly, so that they will not fear darkness, random punishment, and being left alone. But to children of kindness as well as the others, death will sooner or later reveal itself, bringing with it the natural fears and suspicions that all members of human family, excepting saints and the clods, must feel. Only by mastering unmitigated evil does existence attain to transfiguration, writes Martin Buber. Men's task, therefore, is not to extirpate the evil urge, but to reunite it with the good. Love is often mistakenly counted on to accomplish this. Paul Tillich, among countless others, has declared love to be stronger than death. In The New Being, he puts the idea like this: every death means parting, separation, isolation, opposition, and not participating. Love overcomes separation and creates participation in which there is more than that which the individuals involved can bring to it. A nice real rationalization, and unfortunately nothing more. The sad truth is that at the present time, death continues to be stronger than anything, as the philosopher himself has found out. The best way to overcome evil is relentlessly to expose its sources. Prayer may accomplish a little, deliver us from evil, but like love, its effects wear off quickly, at least for most people. The practical way to deliver ourselves from evil is to know that we must deliver ourselves from death. Until the day of freedom from death arrives, we must understand, point out ceaselessly, and pass along the word, even to the brutes when they are doing what we call evil. The real action is that they are of trying to become divine in a rude way, escaping death by injuring the being of others. Evil, we must make clear to ourselves, is brought on by showing off to or imitating imaginary gods, or by flying into a rage or descending the slothful cruelty because they don't exist. Once again, it is generally recognized that death is the real enemy, not our neighbors, that there are no gods in the reviewing stand to be impressed by our deeds or the achievements of others. Then we may learn to forego the destructive competition for the approval of non-existent judges. When the time comes, evil with a big E, as we know it, will begin to wither away. Okay. Chapter 11. Shared Consciousness. Therefore, Aristotle and the followers of Averroes believed that there was in the universe a single nous, or intelligence, and that insofar as we were intelligent, we were all one single intelligence. Ortega y Gasset. Each consciousness seeks to be itself and to be all other consciousnesses without ceasing to be itself. It seeks to be God, Animo. Advancing towards divinity, men suffer the curse of loneliness. The more advanced and aware our unaccountably brief time on earth, the more vulnerable we become to feelings of isolation and midnight attacks of despair. As Jung has said, higher consciousness is the equivalent of being all alone in the world. Ortega expresses the idea more emotionally. We find that we are alone in the universe, and that each I is in its very essence solitude, fundamental solitude. Consciousness shuts me up within myself, makes me at once a prison and a prisoner. I am perpetually arrested within myself. I am the universe, but at the same time I am one, alone. The element of which I am made, the thread of which I am woven, is solitude. Not that we need these eminent men to tell us how it feels to glimpse oblivion. The nameless dread that visits so many older people in the middle of the night can be perfectly well can be given a name. It is simply the fear of death wearing its blank mask. Wise men reprove us. The only ones who fear death are those who are afraid to live. But this is just talk, a sophisticated way of appeasing the imaginary gods, the hope being that through apparent acceptance of death, we will gain exemption from it. The truth is that unknowingly we fight death all the time, and that, in Anonymous words, you, I, and Spinoza wish never to die, and that this longing of ours never to die is our actual essence. We are like the Russian peasant in the fable, old, exhausted, groaning as he hauls a bundle of faggots through the forest. He falters and collapses, whipped by the icy winds, calling out, "O death, come to me now," and death appears, asking, "Did you call?" The old man stares up, starts up. Yes, please. Could you help me on my way, on with my bundle? A very few individuals, most having a remarkable capacity for self-deception, manage not to fear the end. The rest, who claim that they are not afraid, are either lying or keeping so busy that, blocked by bustling trivialities, thoughts of death rarely penetrate their reveries. But fear waits behind the door nevertheless, and the day they peer out and discover nothingness, the result can be catastrophic. For most people of even minimum sensitivity, the awareness of each man's and each woman's final loneliness is unbearable. Alan Watts has noted that humanity's so-called bestial acts are not in the least animal-like, but a protest against isolation. Evidently, again, rare exceptions must be admitted. The human spirit cannot bear to be alone for very long. It must reach out by one means or another, share consciousness with others. This is to say that without God, as opposed to the old gods lingering in our heads, and the promise of an afterlife, the separated consciousness feels hopelessly lost, a speck in the cosmos. It gravitates towards clusters of being, other people. The tendency to gather or huddle together may be explained in many ways, but however you interpret it, units of humanity seem predisposed to share a state of mind, or some believe to assemble into a single consciousness. Whether this may represent a return to the original mass of intelligence, Aristotle's nous, whether such a cosmic awareness actually contains all of our little intelligences seems beside the point. Much more important, even if the cosmic being is nothing but a bubble inside our heads, men appear determined to create it. If we have not evolved from it, we may be self-consciously evolving towards such a group soul. Whether it exists, or simply long for it, or whether we simply long for it, universal being manifests itself to anyone on a psychedelic trip, or during hallucinatory passages of the psyche in periods of fasting or sleeplessness. Journeys of this kind will take you back into an undifferentiated state of being, or forward into. The climactic visions project a single throbbing awareness. We are realized from individual dying and seem through with the death process. As D.H. Lawrence had Birkin say, the question is, at what price? Will the fear of death without God sustain us, lower the individual soul's bargaining power, and cause men to settle for the communal vision? The master, Buber, told Allen Ginsberg that visions were not important, but today the chemically assisted vision provides cut-rate shared consciousness and feelings of immortality for the faint-hearted. As Timothy Leary has told the youth of the world, a battle for the control of consciousness is on. One's identity comes under assault from every direction. Technologies understood only by specialists move in to save men, and at the same time make them feel terribly weak and small. Death remains huge. The temptation is to break and run to the vision, run to the communal soul, seek brotherhood, even at the cost of intelligence, melt into the common perception and downgrade the pursuit of knowledge in order to justify the abandonment of it. Until recently, civilized men and women were able to strike a balance between sharing consciousness and asserting themselves. That is, between experiencing feelings of immortality en masse and striking out for it on one's own. These alternating tendencies, kept in line by various orthodoxies, enabled the species to work fairly well with death, and produced in synthesis what we now know as progress, defined by Friedrich Paul, for one, as the increase in the number of options each of us has available, and from the immortalist point of view, as advances towards solving the mystery of death in one area or another. A compromise between sharing and asserting was managed by words. Educated men and women devoted themselves endlessly to communicating. On the everyday level, this was done the clumsy way, through speech. Semanticists enjoy insisting that people seldom communicate exactly what they mean, but these students of meaning miss the point. When it comes to sharing consciousness, words are as crude as stone axes. Verbal explanations may well not bring us closer together. They are intended primarily to get across to you what I mean, which is something quite different from sharing a moment. They serve as a medium of exchange, not sharing. Whoever speaks asserts himself. Words used precisely and deliberately to explain something becomes tools of aggression against nature. They take apart the environment so that we can compare, though not necessarily share, experience in order to get on top of it. Disdain for words arises from the fear of death of them, and the fear of words comes from the fear of death, because words define our precarious condition. We may also say that to abandon words as a respected medium of exchange would mean to abandon our revolution against the gods and against death. When death seems to be winning, and masses of advanced people who once depended on words begin to feel lost and frightened, then shared consciousness offers itself once again as the best means to mimic immortality. In these circumstances, words that expound and explain the nature of things come into disfavor. If honest, they lead to death. If dishonest, they merely lay one more fraud on us. And at this point, if it is to work, the fraudulent promise that death can be evaded must be mystical and beyond speech. Hence, it has become fashionable today to put down words as inferior medium of exchange. A new generation actively despises printed messages, particularly as they are used in conveying the slow fright of laborious explanation. Among many young people, language at the same time evades and reaches beyond the explicit. It is best listened to in chants and songs. It is used tonally, employed as rhythm, deliberately empties words of content such as like and man, dropping them in for cadence or no reason. Expression of the imprecise, such as your thing, aims positively not to break apart reality. It refuses a denotive speech, but seeks rather to combine words into a general impression, which is not to be nailed down. What exactly do you mean would be considered hopelessly unanswerable, since exactness implies that the scene can be broken into segments. Analysis of any sorts leads to loneliness and death. Reaching for an external present, one does not examine things critically, but enjoys each part of life as it comes along. Hence, according to this view, the value of language has diminished. Words that explain and analyze only offer futile resistance to death the hard way. Sometimes used drearily, they take all life out of the present, constitute a hopeless drag, and themselves smell of death. Though insistence on definition and segmentation of knowledge, words set mankind against nature, and, more grievously, lessen the possibilities of enjoying nature and the pleasures of today. In contrast, music helps create shared consciousness, as does silence, bringing home what Bertrand Russell calls the experience of sudden wisdom, and sudden beauty in the midst of strife. Silent communication makes life feel as though it were lasting forever. In love, the deepest moments come when people don't say anything. As time holds, our understanding seems to have no limits. In this state, Levin and Kitty in Anna Karenina, the incident was taken from Tolstoy's own experience. Each divine the meaning of a long string of initials written down by the other. W, Y, T, M, I, C, N, B, D, T, M, N, O, T is understood at once. When you told me it could never be, did that mean never or then? And I, Y, C, F, A, F, W, H, as if you could forget and forgive what happened. Many go about saving their souls by sharing it in the massive consciousness of one crowd or another. In a crowd, time stops. Among scores or thousands of other identities, we break free. The longing for communion within the crowd soul is not necessarily disgraceful. All it means is the one more person has given up in the face of death and announced his willingness to settle for nirvana with eyes. Group activities ended into emotionally take us out of time and recapture feelings of immortality. Regardless of their moral content and social desirability, they are born out of the same need, to free the formerly unattached soul from loneliness and the fear of death. Thus, choral groups, lynch mobs, cheering sections, and pilgrims shuffling to Mecca are all made up of people striving for the same thing, escape into a communal consciousness. A dispatch from Peiping, printed in the New York Times, 2/1/67, quotes Hishua, the national press agency of China. The broad masses of revolutionary workers, cadres, students, and intellectuals are united with the masses of lower middle peasants to unleash the storm of seizure of power. The rhetoric here sums up an ecstasy that happens to spring from political slogans, but might just as well rise out of Chinese Mardi Gras or Feast of San Gennaro. The scene could as well be transported to Pasadena Rose Bowl on New Year's Day. In fact, the card manipulations of Maoist cadres on national holidays resemble those of USC rooting section. The Chinese howl of hatred and admonishing of revisionist professors by putting their heads in toilet bowls seems not too different from when the Nazi brown shirts howl, or the howl of the Jakarta mob at high noon. The mass action, for good or ill, gives members of the crowd an illusion of being immortal and vaguely godlike. Mass prayers, pep meetings, rallies of every description, community signs, riots, peace marches, and motorcycle runs lead divinity to their unprotected soul, lifted out of time, and is for as long as their spell holds, remove dread. The devout Chinese communist running around and waving his little red book of Mao's aphorisms may appear psychotic to me, yet he is less conscious of death than I am, closer to the all, much farther from death and less afraid of it, safer and secure from cosmic anxiety. He may be better off as the member of what I imagine to be a psychotic commune than I am with my lonely and fearful sanity. Today, all kinds of group activists spill into the street. They are all over, shouting, waving signs and flags. Elsewhere, indoors, our other groups huddle together in corporate citadels. Groups lie down in Greenwich Village, crash pads, burst into the offices of college presidents. They lie down at submarine bases, at the entrances of the draft board, in front of induction centers. They protest racial evil, rent control, and school busing. This sort of thing is all to the good. The best way for citizens to express themselves, get action, stop the war, end racial complacency. Even so, beyond good and evil, such communalism in our time has become a refuge from death, and to some extent a refuge from oneself. Perhaps a majority of the board of directors, all of us, in charge of man's evolution, has decided that the time has come to turn ourselves into the group god. Supposing Jung to be on the right track, we could, for example, have evolved from the primeval collective unconscious to multiple precipitations of individual awareness. Then, since death is unbearable for individuals to contemplate once mythic self-deceptions are stripped away, we may be about to move on toward shared consciousness, which evades time and the fear of oblivion. If so, from the Immortalist point of view, the evolutionary process would be taking a wrong turn. We would be dishonoring our species. Men must never forget that they are cosmic revolutionaries, not stooges conscripted to advance a natural order that kills everybody. Have we evolved this far only to drift off into a communal pipe dream at the last moment before the end of time and the end of death? Yet, the proliferating group mindness taking shape around us can hardly be dismissed as bad. Shared consciousness is a state fallen into with another person in a crowd that imitates immortality. It produces the most blissful sensations we know. It reduces anxiety and loneliness, and it blurs the separations between I and thou. Shared consciousness provides us with regular vacations from aging time and invites us to simulations of the divine and immortal being. Moving in and out of this state nourishes the soul, but to stay in it, stay and hide from death in the group, take too many trips out of time, by whatever means, melt into communal intelligence, represents an evasion of responsibility to ourselves and our children. Mastering the tools that will destroy death takes hard work, planning, studying, all of which a person must do by himself and not in a group, and not necessarily with pleasure. Faith in such activity must survive recurring attacks of doubt and depression. The work will have to be accomplished in the face of annihilation, but still it is the proper destiny of our race to carry it forward. Humanity has two ways to avoid suicide. One is to wrap itself in a massive dream, fall into various kinds of group consciousness, turning away from death and pretending it isn't there. Or it will face up to a meaningless universe, put up with the doubt and unbelief a little while longer, and attack the problem of aging with the same enthusiasm and singleness of purpose we showed in liberating atomic energy and sending rockets to the moon.